Good afternoon. Welcome to NUS FutureWork 2.0. We live in unprecedented times where climate change is happening at an exponential rate. According to the World Economic Forum, artificial intelligence can contribute substantially in the fight against climate change. We are grateful today to have with us experts in the field to discuss ways in which we can leverage AI to address climate change and how we can develop a more sustainable AI. Without further ado, I would like to welcome the panelists for today. Professor Lim Keng, Professor Tulika Mitra, Mr. Gabriel Wong, and our moderator for today's panel, Associate Professor Lee Seng. And without further ado, I'll leave it in the good hands of Associate Prof. Lee.
Okay, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome again to our panel discussion on AI, a double-edged sword for climate change. I'm P.S. Lee, Executive Director of the Energy Studies Institute and Dean's Chair Associate Prof with the College of Design and Engineering at NUS. It's my pleasure today to moderate this session with distinguished panelists. So as we gather today, we find ourselves at a critical juncture in a fight against climate change. The urgency to mitigate the adverse effects of climate change is more pressing than ever. Amidst this global challenge, AI emerges as a paradoxical force. On one hand, AI development and deployment contribute to greenhouse gas emission and resource consumption, posing significant environmental challenges. On the other hand, AI holds the transformative potential to revolutionize our approach to climate change, often offering innovative solutions to optimize renewable energy systems, enhance carbon capture technology, and improve overall sustainability practices. Today, we aim to explore this intricate relationship between AI and climate change. Our discussion will be structured around three main themes or segments. Segment one will be on AI's environmental impact. We will examine how AI development and deployment contribute to greenhouse gas emissions and resource consumption. We will then explore AI's environmental footprint, focusing on primary sources of emissions and resource use. For segment two, we will cover AI for climate actions. We will look at how AI can be harnessed to address climate change. We will discuss promising AI applications that contribute directly to climate solutions, such as optimizing renewable energy systems and enhancing carbon capture technology. And for the third segment, towards sustainable AI, we will discuss strategies to make AI itself more sustainable. This includes improving energy efficiency, utilizing green or sustainable data centers, and adopting circular economy principles to reduce resource consumption. I'm honored to be joined by a distinguished panel of experts and leaders who bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to this discussion. So to put things in context, I thought it would be helpful for our distinguished panelists to do a 1-minute self-introduction, right, about their day job, right, their CCA or ECA, right, so that we understand their perspective better. So with that, maybe I can invite Prof. Lim to give a 1-minute self-introduction about your day job, your organization, and what you're passionate about.
Thanks, PS. Yeah, many thanks for inviting me to this panel. So my name is Keng. I'm the Assistant CEO at A-Star. So A-Star is Singapore's largest public sector R&D organization, where we develop research to improve both lives as well as economic impact. So I oversee research in the area of sustainability, in the area of AI digitalization, and also in the area on advanced manufacturing. So my background is engineer. Thank you.
Next, maybe Prof. Tulika.
Yeah, hello everybody. Thanks for inviting me, PS, and really glad to be here. My name is Tulika Mitra. I'm a professor in the Department of Computer Science, School of Computing. But for the last 3 years, I think my day job is acting as the Vice Provost of Academic Affairs within NUS. But my real job, which I do over the weekend, is that I'm very interested in looking at energy efficient solutions for computing. So in particular, I look at hardware software co-design for generating systems, computer systems that can be far more efficient than what you can have today.
Thanks. Last but not least, Gabriel.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Gabriel. I'm one of the co-founders of this company called MVGX. It's a Singapore-based and Singapore-licensed digital finance, non-bank financial institution. And one of our key missions is really to explore the intersection between sustainability and also finance. And one of our focus is on sustainable finance, green finance, and how we could incorporate both AI as well as blockchain into the space. So that's my day job. Outside of my day job, I try to sleep a bit more because usually weekdays we're just so caught up with everything. So my background, I used to be a lawyer. I'm a graduate from NUS Law, and then I did that for a number of years, and I went into finance. So this is sort of my third iteration. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's begin the discussion with the first segment, focusing on AI environmental impact. Prof. Tulika and Prof. Lim, can you elaborate on the current understanding of AI environmental footprint, particularly focusing on the primary sources of greenhouse gas emission and resource consumption?
AI has really changed in a number of ways the energy consumption and accordingly the carbon emission for ICT infrastructure, the information and communication technology infrastructure. Today, if we look at Singapore, our carbon emission from ICT is about 2%, right? So that's not too bad. But if you are looking ahead in the future, by 2030, this would become 8%. And it would become significantly more by 2050. And the reason for that is, of course, a lot because of AI, as well as crypto and other blockchain technology. If you look at just any big tech today, you look at Google, you look at Meta, you look at any of these companies, their data center energy consumption has gone up tremendously. So for example, just Google, their energy consumption has gone up from 48% from what it was in 2019 to additional 48% today. And that's all coming from AI. And the reason it is coming from AI is twofold. The first one is that in order to have this AI, you are now training these huge models, which are the frontier models or the large language models, the ones that we are using, for example, ChatGPT. And training these models is extremely energy consuming. So just to put this in context, today we are using GPT-4. The one that we were using earlier, once ChatGPT came out, was GPT-3. It had about 370 billion parameters. And in order to train that, the total energy consumption or carbon emission of that was equivalent to the lifetime of 5 cars. So just imagine, right? I mean, it's a huge amount of energy, and that was a smaller model. Today, the kind of models that we are talking about, it easily consumes, hundreds of cars worth of energy, right? Lifetime energy. So it's really, really huge, and everybody is doing it. It's not just one model being built. So there are multiple models being built. So that's one part of the energy consumption, carbon emission, and also water, right? I mean, we always think of the greenhouse emission, but also significant amount of water to go into the cooling of these data centers. But that's the training part, and then you have the inference part. Now, if you think the training is bad, the inference is even worse, because once you have trained the model, all of us are using it, right? And that's going to go on for a very, very long time. And again, just to put this in context, and I think it's kind of mind-blowing, that ChatGPT or OpenAI, the parent company, the company behind ChatGPT, in order to serve all our requests, every day the amount of energy they consume is equivalent to 200,000 Singapore household energy. Just imagine, one day, OpenAI itself is consuming energy equivalent to 200,000 Singapore household. Why is that? Because each request that we send to GPT, it consumes apparently 10x more energy than a Google search, right? And we do it indiscriminately. And today we are just doing the language. Nowadays, you can see that the video models are coming up, the image models are coming up, and people just frivolously use all these AI models. So there is a significant energy consumption that's coming from these models, both from the training part of the thing as well as the inference thing. And not to forget that this is just the beginning. With AI, what we are going to have is a lot more of, for example, robotics that will come. You'll have nano robots going around everywhere. So there will be a lot of electronic waste as well, right? It's not just the energy consumption, but also sustainability in terms of many other aspects.
Thanks. Prof. Lim?
Yeah, it was just recently announced that I think ChatGPT is going to introduce the Search GPT. It's going to change the way we do search. I think Prof has just mentioned that if you do a traditional Google search, a lot more energy efficient. But now if you have to rely on a kind of a chatbot to do the Q&A and search, it's really going to search the amount of energy required. Simply because every time you do a query, it needs to generate, it needs to pick up the answer. And that generative process then soaks up a lot of energy. And I thought of just adding that I think there were also estimates from different studies that says that with all the proliferation on the use of AI everywhere, whether it's from your Microsoft 365 incorporating Copilot to your search engines and all that, is going to even soak up about 3.5%, I think, of the world's energy just using AI itself. And then this is really doubling every 100 days. So you're really looking at a very, very exponential increase in the use of power, in the use of energy, in emitting carbon, due to this proliferation of AI. And this is now to the point that AI is coming to everywhere, our phones and all that. So we're anticipating that if we do not do something about it, this is actually going to be a huge challenge to our climate.
Thanks, Prof. Lim. So to your point about doing something to manage the immense energy and carbon footprint associated with AI, next I'd like Gabriel to share with us how does the digital infrastructure of a financial exchange like MVGX manage its environmental footprint, particularly in energy consumption and emissions?
Right. So I think as a practitioner and as a organization that operates a financial infrastructure, particularly in trading, the honest truth is that there is very little we can do in terms of how we decide on our energy input, right? All our systems are on cloud. So we are on AWS, we are on OCI, Oracle Cloud, we are on Azure. And we're not exactly their largest customer, so there's very little that we could sort of do in terms of pushing them. But we try to understand, I think, at least what is their PUE, right? Which is the, I think exactly, thank you, Prof. The matrix that is used to sort of, rank and curate data centers, right? So that's the honest truth. But having said that, what we could do that's within our control is that we try to do a couple of things. One is that we try to be really focus in terms of how we identify the carbon emission factors, in terms of how we calculate the emissions that's generated from our own operations, and then also to report them. So this is something that we do on our own. Two, we are sort of like a mini evangelist within our ecosystem. So we try to sort of speak to our stakeholders, right, including our clients, some of our external service providers. And to this end, what we have also done is that we have created a dashboard. We call it the Scope 3 dashboard. And what it does is that it allows us to understand and then to track, first of all, what are the sources of our emission, right? So in our case, of course, our Scope 1, Scope 2, and I think Scope 2 is probably our biggest component because we're on cloud. And then also we have a Scope 3 component that would allow our so-called stakeholders to upload their relevant data, their own Scope 1 and Scope 2, and where they don't have those data, what we have also done is that we have put together a emissions factor database, and we sort of open it up to them that they would be able to leverage on that database to identify the correct emission factor. And so the end product is that everybody is sort of on this pathway to understand where they are in terms of their emission. And then I think that provides a so-called objective basis for them to start thinking and then hopefully maybe even do something about it, right? The third thing that we have done is that we have also worked with a global ISO certification body, and we have come out with a framework that we call the decarbonization rating framework. And it's interesting because what it does is that we would look at ourselves and we would also then benchmark it against some of our peers. So for example, we look at what SGX is, right? So we will be able to extract some of the pertinent information from the annual report from SGX. I look at, say, what the Tokyo Stock Exchange is doing, the Hong Kong Exchange, and NASDAQ in the US. And with all this data, we are able to sort of see how we do. Obviously, it's not completely accurate because, again, I'm relying on publicly disclosed information. But I think that sort of gives us a good sense of sort of where we are. And so it's not just about understanding what we do, but also trying to be that, as I said, the mini evangelist, and then trying to see how we stand. So I think, like I said, as a practitioner, this is really what we have done so far. Yeah.
Thank you, Gabriel. So I guess every step counts, right? I think every step is never too small. So having examined AI environmental impact, let's now turn our attention to its potential to contribute positively to climate actions. So to the panelists, so what are some of the most promising AI applications you have seen that directly contribute to climate solutions, such as optimizing renewable energy systems or enhancing carbon capture technologies? So maybe Prof. Lim, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, so you're right. It's sort of a tool that can use to also address some of these climate issues. And we have been using AI as well as high-performance computing to solve some of these challenges that we are facing. For example, like I think PS mentioned about using AI as well as computational methods to develop and to design much more efficient renewable energy systems. So we have been, over the past many years, been working with companies like Citrum, which are now moving into renewable energy, on how do we use some of these techniques in order to design the wind farm so that it's a lot more efficient. And then there's also other projects around how do you use, again, AI as well as high-performance computing to design catalysts. To design catalysts such as for carbon capture applications, design catalysts for carbon utilization. So it has been also been announced that we, for example, we worked with catalyst companies as well as sustainable companies to develop and design catalysts that's able to take in CO2 as a feedstock and then use it to convert into useful chemicals, such as sustainable aviation fuel. And also, we have also been working with government agencies, essentially to use many of these computational methods. So, for example, like now Singapore is trying to move towards a full-fledged deployment of electric vehicle by the year 2040. And then now you've got different agencies, government agencies, setting up electric chargers all over Singapore. So actually the entity that is advising for the government in terms of where should you put the electric chargers, where should you put in such a way that it doesn't affect the mobility of drivers in terms of the anxiety, such as the anxiety to charge, and also doing it in a way that minimizes, at least in the first instance, the requirement to upgrade your grid. So we're actually the R&D partner behind this government effort to essentially advise the government on where should we place electric vehicle chargers in order to have a much more sustainable transportation system. And then, of course, also many other work. I think Prof mentioned just now about software, hardware, co-optimization, about how do we develop now new AI chips. There's a lot more efficient, but yet at the same time, you do not sacrifice on accuracy. And also other technologies like how do you learn, how do you train AI models using less data? Because the more data you need, the more energy it consumes. So many other applications that, if we apply our imagination, we could actually use it for climate change.
Prof. Tulika?
Yeah, I think, as Prof mentioned, AI plus X is AI plus science, rather. AI for science is something that I think is really exciting because I think that's going to change a lot of things. And today, AI is not so good at reasoning, even though it's actually improving. So today, for example, I think Google DeepMind announced Alpha Proof, that could actually be at the silver medal level in International Math Olympiad. So that's really kind of amazing. And it's actually using reasoning, not just doing as people call it, the stochastic parrot. It's not doing that. But even with today's technology that AI has available, I think there has been a lot of interesting applications that have already come out in terms of directly addressing climate modeling. And I think we are trying to address that in the context of NUS AI Institute, or NAII, that we have recently established to really collaborate between the computer science and all the other disciplines so that we can enable these kind of optimizations. One of the examples that's my favorite is really weather or the climate modeling. As you know, the climate modeling actually requires modeling the physics, right? And so you have like all these very complicated equations that needs to run on high-performance computing systems, and that's extremely energy consuming. And even then, you don't really get it at a very high resolution. You cannot say that what's going to happen, within the Faculty of Engineering at NUS versus computing, at some point in time, it's going to rain or flood or whatever. But using AI, you can actually do that extremely fast because it's just looking at the patterns, and you can do it extremely fast, and you can do it apparently with much less energy, right? So that's something that's really interesting. The other thing that you can do is, for example, using AI in fusion reactors, right? So fusion energy is kind of the holy grail for our clean energy because that's how the sun operates. And what you can do in this case is that using AI, figure out when that reaction is going to become unstable, there is a kind of a stability problem, and then you can actually take actions. These are things that as humans we cannot do because this is happening at millisecond range. So all of these AI for science opportunities, I think, is going to make a big change in terms of the climate and clean energy. And I think it's going to be a feedback loop because what we are going to see is that this clean energy then can be fed into the data centers. And one of the things, for example, my group is interested in is that we are looking at how do you figure out when the cloud, when the when the clean energy is available and then connect it to the grid at that point in time in order to do work that is not mission critical, right? So you can actually do it when the clean energy is available. And I think that would kind of enable us to really have this really nice positive feedback loop to solve the problem.
So Prof. Lim and Prof. Tulika spoke extensively about AI for science. Gabriel, what about AI for finance? So how is MVGX leveraging AI to enhance green financing, particularly regarding carbon disclosure and the transparency of environmental impacts for issuers and investors?
Right. I think on the issue of green finance or sustainable finance, I think it's something that it's very much in the forefront of the minds of a lot of the professionals in the financial industries, and even I think at the policymaker level, right? MES, for example. So the question is always, how do you sort of define what is green finance? Meaning that how do you know that a particular borrower, for example, it's green, it satisfies that so-called green criteria, right? In terms of its business or in terms of its use of proceeds. And of course, how do you identify a project that is actually green, right? The so-called use case for a particular project. So, I mean, I think that two profs have touched on, say, renewable energy, even data centers, and even some of the AI applications. So I think that is always, when it comes to finance, that's always, I think, the challenge. And what we have seen in the European Union, and that is really, I think, one of the so-called thought leaders globally when it comes to green finance. And that's what they decide, what they think about, and then that kind of filters back to this part of the world, including Singapore. And the idea really is increasing scrutiny into claims of so-called green finance, and also how to sort of avoid, and of course, financial institutions in the space avoiding, the charges of greenwashing. So I think that's really sort of the background. And for us, again, as a practitioner, what we try to do is that we try to understand, I think, first of all, that when it comes to decarbonization as a means forward, you cannot sort of divorce it from the financial space, because when it comes to whether it's new projects or existing companies or existing buildings or even projects that's looking to move on the decarbonization journey, you always sort of need money. You need CapEx to kind of do that. And the question, therefore, is how do you sort of help these companies or the project owners and sort of fit into the wider context, which is what I spoke about, which is how do you ensure that these are really green? Right, and towards this end, my company, we are very honored to have been chosen by MES to be part of the larger framework called the China-Singapore Green Finance Task Force. So this is a framework that is a bilateral framework between Singapore and China, and one of the goals is to sort of leverage on technology to facilitate so-called green finance or sustainable finance, and of course to facilitate its wider adoption. And we're very sort of honored because we are part of one of the work streams that is sort of driving this, at least from the Singapore side. And so as part of that, what we have done is to really leverage on, again, the emerging field of AI to sort of create a green data assessment framework, right? And the idea, therefore, is to have a framework that would allow us to be able to identify, to be able to curate whether it's a company or projects, to see whether it fits into the so-called established green framework. So that's one thing. The other thing is that as part of this wider so-called green finance data framework, we also try to leverage on AI technology to identify what is the so-called green, the relevant green data benchmark, right? Because without the framework, without the benchmarking, again, it makes it very hard for practitioners at that level, whether it's banks, whether it's borrowers, to be able to make that determination, and or even to say, hey, look, I am a green project, I'm a green borrower, and for the banks on the other side of the table to say, hey, I can say for sure that this is a project that satisfies the sustainable and the green criteria. So this is something that we have sort of done, and we try to sort of leverage again on AI within the wider so-called sustainable and the green finance, overall context. And so the last thing that we try to do is that we have also been building up a emissions factor database. So right now we have slightly less than 900,000 emission factor that covers 7 industries, more than 1,000 emission activity, and more than 66 subsectors. So it's a big database that we have, and clearly, if you try to do it manually or the very traditional way, it's quite hard and it's really time consuming. And again, this is where I think AI helps us to be able to sort of synthesize some of the data and to be able to sort of frame it in the right way that both ourselves and also some of our stakeholders can use this database to very quickly identify, again, the right emission factor, and also in certain cases to do predictive emission factors where there are some missing gaps. So I think that's kind of where we are in terms of how we sort of use it within the context of green finance. Yeah.
Thank you, Gabriel. So I think it's clear that the AI can be pervasive, right? Not only for science, for financing, whatnot. So in the next segment, let's discuss how to make AI more sustainable, right? So to the panelists, so what steps can be taken within the AI development life cycle to enhance sustainability, particularly in terms of energy efficiency and reducing resource consumption? Prof. Tulika?
Sure. I think we talked a lot about, it can be done at multiple layers. I think we also talked quite a lot about renewable energy and clean energy. So using clean energy during the, the training of the model or the inferencing of the model. I think that's the first level. The second level is really improving the PUE of the data centers. And I know PS does a lot of work on liquid cooling, right? So that has come down quite significantly. It used to be probably about 2.2 or so. It was quite high, maybe 20 years back. Nowadays, if you look at most of the data centers, even in Singapore, I think it has come down to 1.2 or so on. So that's good, right? Because we are being able to use the entire energy for compute rather than the cooling. So that's great. But what is not so great is really the efficiency of the computing itself has not improved at all. So what we are looking at is that if you had earlier the servers that did not have this NVIDIA GPUs, the big ones, you were looking at about 1 kilowatt of energy. And today, just with the GPU servers, you are just looking at the same thing. You are looking at 10 kilowatts of energy. And imagine you put 100,000 of these H100 GPUs together. It's really mind-blowing that the amount of energy that you are generating. And the worst thing is that the GPUs are not becoming any efficient. So so my group is interested in looking at generating more efficient computer chips. And so if you look at the GPU over the last many years, the compute efficiency, that is how much compute you can do with certain amount of power, that has not improved at all. What has improved or changed is that they just keep adding more and more chips to increase the compute capacity, but it's not the compute density or the compute efficiency is not improving. So there is a whole lot of opportunity to improve that quite significantly. So for example, instead of using the GPUs. You can actually, the GPUs are good for certain classes of AI workload. For certain other classes of AI workload, which are more irregular, it's not so great. So we can, for example, use something called reconfigurable computing, or FPGAs. We can use FPGAs to get 20x more energy efficient solution for AI workload compared to the GPU, and get a similar performance or even better performance. And we can actually design chips that are more tailored for that workload, right? So what we call software-defined hardware. So essentially, you have the hardware that is very, very tailored, corresponding to whatever software you are doing. And if you do that, that actually significantly for us, for example, we can improve the energy efficiency quite significantly. And finally, I think in NUS, we are looking at really looking at a cross-layer approach, which starts at the algorithm level. So for example, the models themselves are becoming smaller, which is great, right? Because if you compare, so last year, when GPT came out, GPT-4, it was huge. It had 1.7 trillion parameters. Today, if you look at GPT-4o mini, has the same performance, actually better performance in terms of the reasoning capability, but it has only about 8 billion parameters. So just remember, 1.7 trillion to 8 billion parameters, and you are roughly at the same range, right? So this is really amazing. So at computing, we are looking at reducing the models through distillations. You can do quantization. You can do a lot of things at the algorithmic level to reduce it. Then at the software level, right? How do you parallelize that workload and spread it across different devices? Use different kinds of devices. You just don't need to use just GPU. You can use different kinds of devices. And then design new chips, right? That are better suited for this kind of workloads. And we have people working in 2D materials. We have people working in microelectronics. So and then you need to combine that with this software, and then that kind of cross stack behavior actually going to give us significant improved efficiency.
Prof. Lim or Gabriel?
Yeah, I just want to add along the same thread that I think a lot of people think that the large language models can actually do a lot of things, but for many more, I would say more specific tasks, it does not necessarily mean that you have to go to a large language model. You can always go to a small language model, and then internally, with my colleagues, we are talking about tiny language models, where instead of now a large language model being trained with lots of data, trillions, billions of parameters. If your application is a lot more specific, you can actually train it on a much smaller set of curated data that is tailored for that specific application rather than something much more broad-based. And so simply by doing this, you could actually move away from having an LLM to a SLM, maybe in future even a tiny language model. That way, you are able to then still serve your application requirement, in this case using a very bespoke method, and still able to then save on energy. Then of course, different methods, as what I mentioned earlier, and also Prof mentioned about trying to develop a lot more efficient algorithms, trying to ensure that the algorithms, the software, as well as the hardware that you develop is co-optimized so that they both are able to derive much greater efficiency. And also, I think at the energy level, I think the desired outcome, of course, is to have green electrons. In fact, I was just at MIT about 2 months ago. So then I was at the College of Computing, and then I asked them, where's your data center? Where's your servers? Where do you train? And they mentioned that, we don't have one on campus, right? Because our main key data center, supercomputing center, is outside of the Cambridge city, on the outskirts, simply because there are access to green electrons over there. So I think similarly, I think in Singapore, we're also looking at how can we bring in the green electrons by collaborating with our regional partners, by going on regional grid. So this is where we could actually harness on all the green renewable energy, whether it's hydro, whether it's wind, whether it's solar, in collaboration with our neighboring partners, so that the green electrons can then make its way in. But then you then have to ask the question then, if let's say now we're going to have a portion of our energy that comes from renewable sources, and then these renewable sources are not as predictable compared to power generation, this is where, again, you would then need new technologies to come in around how do you do load balancing, how do you then do some of this distributed smart grid, so that you're able to supply reliable power to the data centers, which may be actually powering very, very important tasks. So I think there's many, many innovations coming to the forth.
So I think it's clear that lots can be done within the AI development life cycle, but I think equally important is actually in terms of the application or usage of AI. So Gabriel, will you be able to share what are some of the strategies MVGX adopted to ensure its AI and digital system operate efficiently, minimizing energy use while maintaining high performance?
Yeah, so I think what we have done is something that I think the two profs before me have already sort of spoken on. Obviously, you know, we don't have infinite resources. You know, we have to be very mindful of cost and also performance. And so we have done exactly what was said, which is to really train on smaller batches, smaller models, right? And the idea really is to focus on the kind of data sets that's relevant for us, that enables us to do the task well. And I think we have been pretty sort of smart about it, try to understand the impact of AI, ChatGPT, and everything, and then seeing how that could be relevant for us and how we could use it for my business, for the stuff that that's relevant for us. So that's something that we are doing and very active on that. The other thing that we have sort of tried to do with our clients is that we have sort of incorporated edge computing, right? So one of the things is try to do everything say on a device, right? For example, our cell phone, right? So again, mobile apps are so ubiquitous now, and the idea really is to say, hey, instead of doing everything on the data center, which is obviously expensive, can we do a lot of that computing, that permutation on the edge, right? And then, this really reduces the so-called frequency of data transfer to the DC, right? And in this way, we sort of save on our costs, but at the same time, still maintain that efficiency and the performance. Yeah.
Thanks, Gabriel. So next, let's move on to the questions contributed by the audience, both here in person as well as online. So the first question is directed to Gabriel. So for MVGX, right, with data on carbon emission, would you be able to share the interventions taken? There's also another related question by another audience member. So how does MVGX use to measure, or what does MVGX use to measure carbon emission? Is it in terms of cost, manpower required, or other parameters?
I'm not sure what intervention meant, but maybe taking a guess, I guess what the person is asking is how do we sort of curate these data, I guess. So if that's the question, so what we have done is, first of all, we have our primary data sets from our clients, right? So that's important. So my company right now, we're in 5 markets, including Singapore. We're in our neighboring countries. We're also in Taiwan and China. And then I think by the end of the year, we will be in Vietnam and in Thailand, hopefully. So a lot of that data source comes from our data, our clients' data, which they feed to us in terms of what needs to be done. So the other thing that we have done also is to work closely with these global ISO agency bodies, which is important because they essentially sets the bar, the standards, the framework, and by working with them, we also have been able to have access to some of these data. So that's great. The framework, in terms of how we, or the standards that we adopt, it's something that, again, we follow a global framework and a benchmark. So, for example, you talk about scope 1, 2, and 3, it's basically based on the GHG protocol. And that really sets the foundation for all kinds of other reporting that is relevant for financial institutions, say, for example, GRI, and the forthcoming ISSB. So that's really the framework and the standards that we follow.
Yeah, thanks, Gabriel. So the next question, I think, was kind of related to the first one, or probably even earlier, right? So how do we measure the carbon emission, right? So is it in terms of cost, manpower? I think, Gabriel, you mentioned the emission factors, right? So for example, if you could share some light on how the emission factors, or the other two panelists can share with the audience. So how do we calculate the emission factors, right? Obviously, I think we know that Singapore, the electrical grid is actually largely the natural gas powered, right? So that's actually associated the emission factors. But what about other types of application, right? Including, for example, on-site power generation. So would the emission factor be necessarily lower, or maybe in the case of data centers, right? Would we going for cloud services translates to a lower emission factors versus having our on-prem or hosting the racks of servers in the co-location data centers? So any panelists would like to take this question on how carbon emission is measured or calculated?
I think. So sorry, maybe I kind of start the ball rolling. I think that it is important to sort of take a step back and sort of broadly understand how carbon emissions are calculated, right? So broadly speaking, without sort of delving into the details, you have two so-called factors. One is the emission activity. The other one is the emission factor. And you multiply these two, you get the product, which is the emission. And so generally, emission activity is quite easy to identify. So example would be, air travel or commute, right? How do you get to NUS this afternoon, right? Did you take the MRT? Did you take a bus? Did you, take a bicycle? Did you walk here? So that's the activity part, right? And then within that, how do you actually sort of determine what's the quantity? So there are people who say, well, you just look at the so-called revenue spend, the spend base type, right? Which is, I spend, $5, right? Taking the taxi to come here. There are people who say, well, that's not exactly accurate. You actually need to have more granular, right? But this is still relating to the activity portion, but the key thing, which I think a lot of people are struggling with, is the emission factor. And I think generally most people, when they think about emission factor, if they do think about it at all, they just take estimates, right? Which is fine if you sort of use it for internal modeling, right? But if you're trying to get these numbers used, say, for example, as part of the financial context, or even to have your numbers certified as part of the forthcoming ISSB, which is, by the way, a financial reporting framework that would happen in 2026. So all listed companies in Singapore have to report in according to that. The idea is that if you use estimates to calculate emission, you're probably going to fail, right? So an example of that is if you read the most recent Singtel sustainability report, you will notice that they move towards something that they call company-based emission factor, or product-based emission factor. And that subtle shift in how they define that is basically saying, look, we have moved away from estimates to now something that we are very confident and that's very specific to a particular activity or particular product that I am using. And so I'm including that in my sustainable report disclosure. So that is that thing. So I think, yeah.
Other panelists?
Okay, so maybe a few other things. I think first and foremost, I think like what Gabriel mentioned, the emission factor is something which eventually will need to be harmonized based on a common standard so that industry-wide this can be practiced. But this is currently, in many ways, still somewhat lacking today. And I think the different organizations or bodies are sort of moving from sector to sector so as to try to establish those emission factors. And that really require then a lot of work, a lot of education and all that. But aside from emission activities, emission factor, I think the other thing which is very important is the whole life cycle management. Because if you are, whether it's a data center, whether it is your in-house data servers and all that, you really have to think about, in the ideal case, the entire life cycle. Because if one wants to be very, very specific and anal about it, you almost have to go all the way back to, okay, what are the raw materials that are made up of, let's say, your silicons, your cables and all that, all the way to the installation processes, all the way to the actual usage of it, the type of energy and power used to run your center, and all the way to decommissioning it. So upon decommissioning, how do you scrap it? How do you sort of decommission it in such a way that it is sustainable? And in the most extreme case, looking at this end-to-end life cycle assessment is often required if we really want to go green. Because in many other sectors, like they were saying that in electric vehicle, if you buy electric vehicle, you may find that, very, very low carbon emission. But actually, if you go upstream, the manufacturing of the electric vehicle, the batteries and all that, actually consumes a lot of carbon. So if you look at it from an end-to-end perspective, there is a break-even point. You have to drive the EV long enough to reach that break-even point that it becomes a lot more environmental friendly compared to an ICE, compared to a combustion engine. So this whole life cycle assessment, I thought is actually equally important.
Yeah, so I just want to follow up on that life cycle assessment thing because it's actually very, very important in the context of computing infrastructure in particular, right? So if you look at the data centers, the carbon emission activity during usage is actually quite high. So it's 80% compared to the manufacturing of these devices and decommissioning and so on, because the usage is extremely high. Even there, it is quite important for us to measure the amount of activity, and I think one of the challenges that we are facing is that we don't know how to measure that activity for software. We know how to measure it for example, for your refrigerator, we know how to measure it for our computer, but we do not know how to measure it for the software, which is actually contributing to this. But if you look at the other end, and Gabriel mentioned about Edge AI, which is very close to my heart because I work on Edge AI, that you are trying to move things to the closer and closer to the data source, right? So you're moving it, for example, to your smartphone or smartwatch and things like that. You try to do things closer to the source. That way you save the energy that you require to send it to the cloud, right? But it turns out, and from our research, that in those cases, 80% of the energy is actually gone, or carbon emission is for manufacturing the smartphone or a smartwatch rather than the usage. So you are actually wasting a lot of energy for it.
So we have a lot more questions from the audience. Unfortunately, we have less than 1 minute left. So I'd like to thank you, all our esteemed panelists, for their invaluable insights, and to our audience for your active engagement. The discussion has highlighted AI's dual role in our fight against climate change and the need for a balanced approach to harnessing its full potential while mitigating its environmental impact. With that, I will hand the mic back to the MC.
The panelists have provided amazing insights on how we can leverage on AI and in innovative ways to address our environmental impact, to come up with sustainable solutions to keep our impact for our children's children. Can I invite you to give them a round of applause, please?